Would you please rise and join me with the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Note for the record that all council members are present.
Thank you.
Sherry?
Thank you.
So we have an adoption. The agenda is the first thing on our agenda here. And
I have one quick addition, Madam Mayor.
okay.
I'd like to close the meeting in memory of my stepdaughter, Rona Falotuese, and I'll give you the spelling for that.
Okay.
And with that, I'll make a motion to move to adopt the agenda.
I would like to make one change to pull item G on the consent calendar.
G as in George.
G as in George.
Okay.
And then also on new business, item A, we would like to move that item, put that at the bottom of the new business, because our Public Works Director is in another meeting, and so he'll be joining us a little bit late. So we'll move that subject to his being able to join us for that item.
Okay, my motion includes
When you
those.
say remove, excuse me. When you say remove item G, you mean take it off the agenda altogether?
No. Remove from the consent calendar.
Oh, so we'll discuss it
Yes.
at the time. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Got it.
Any other changes? I have a
Motion
Motion.
to adopt
Second.
the agenda.
motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That moves us to introduction of new police officers for the city of Brisbane. And I think we have the chief here to do the honors.
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Thank you for allowing me to take a few minutes of tonight's meeting to introduce to you and our community our newest members to our police department family. I'm going to start with the most senior officer. So we have Officer Giovanni Perez. I'm going to provide just a short little bio. I won't take too much time. Giovanni grew up in Daly City. He attended Reardon High School. Prior to coming on board, Giovanni worked as a supervisor for a private security company in San Francisco. Giovanni is married, has a 1.5-year-old son. He and his family live in Burlingame. His hobbies consist of playing, watching sports, cars, and spending time with his family and friends. Giovanni has been with us since January of 2014. Then we have Officer Jason Kwan. Jason grew up in El Centro, California. He attended San Diego State University, where he obtained his Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice Administration. Jason came to us as a lateral police officer from the Martinez Police Department, bringing a wealth of knowledge and expertise in drug recognition. Jason is married and has a 3.5-year-old daughter, and he and his family live in Redwood City. Jason's hobbies consist of hunting, watching hockey, and spending time with his family. Jason has been with us since September of 2014. Next, we have Officer Karina Shum. Karina grew up in South San Francisco, where she attended South City High. She attended UC Davis, where she obtained her Bachelor of Art degree in Communications with a minor in Psychology. Karina comes to us from the South San Francisco Police Department. She resides still in South City, and her hobbies are running, traveling, spending time with family and friends. Karina has been with us since September of 2014. Next, we have Officer Robert Malone. Robert grew up in the inner city of Los Angeles in Watts, California. He attended Cal State University of Sacramento, where he obtained a bachelor's degree in social work. Robert has experience in working as a mental health counselor, a counselor for youth involved in gangs, and a classroom coordinator for students with autism and Asperger's syndrome. Robert comes to us from Oakland Police Department. Robert is married and has a 5-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son. Robert and his family reside in Alameda. His hobbies consist of playing tennis, ping pong, baseball, basketball, live theater, and socializing with family and friends. Robert has been with us since October of 2014. Next, we have Officer Dominic Flores. Dominic grew up in San Carlos. He attended Carmont High School in Belmont, and then went off to UC Santa Barbara, where he received his bachelor's degree in philosophy. Dominic comes to us from Santa Barbara Police Department. He is married and has a 1.5-year-old daughter. Dominic and his family still reside in San Carlos. His hobbies are cooking, eating, music, and spending time with family and friends. And Dominic has been with us since November of 2014. And lastly, we have Officer Luke Olson. Luke grew up in Santa Rosa. He attended Santa Rosa Junior College, where he obtained a double major associate's degree in social and behavioral sciences and administration of justice. Prior to coming on board, Luke worked in construction. Luke is married and has a 1.5-year-old son. Luke and his family still live in Santa Rosa. Hobbies are hiking, camping, cooking, gardening, and spending time with family. Luke has been with us since December of 2014. This concludes the introduction of our newest officers. I just want to say that it's been very challenging going through the hiring process and finding the right individuals, not only for the department, but also for our community. All 6 of these officers are here because they're a good fit, and they all have something special that they bring to our organization. And we are very happy to have them on board. And lastly, I'd just like to thank the council for your ongoing support. Any questions from council?
I have a comment.
Yes.
I'm sure we all have comments. That's what we do.
I mean, welcome aboard, everybody. I've seen you around. I've met not all of you, but a few of you, and it's good that you're on board. And I'm really happy to see our full staff police department again. I was really concerned about that for years. For officers that are out there in the audience, job burnout, was a real factor, and it was a real concern for me as a council member. And I'm really happy to see these new officers aboard, for our community and for the officers who are still here. So, and you, Chief.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining the police department. I look forward to working with you, and I noticed the theme of 1.5-year-old children, so you're probably not going to be getting much sleep. But welcome, and I think you'll find Brisbane a very special place.
Yeah, I just want to just thank you for making your career in law enforcement. It's not an easy job, and it takes a very special person to commit themselves to serving the community in your capacity. So, my hat goes off to you, and I think you're going to enjoy very much working in Brisbane, and hopefully, I hear none of you are living in Brisbane, but hopefully one of these days that you decide, to maybe change your current residence and move here, because it's a great community, as you will find out, and just really looking forward to to seeing you out on the beat and helping out our community. So thank you.
Yeah. First of all, this is the safest I've ever felt in a city council meeting. Wow. Second of all, I also want to second what my colleagues have said. I mean, we have been understaffed for a number of years, and it's really great to get back up there where we can actually do, I'm sure the police chief would agree, the fully effective job of policing that the police department wants to do and the council and the community anticipate. So we're really happy that we're back up to par where we need to be. The other thing I wanted to just mention, some of my colleagues have referred to it as well. As we all know, there's been a lot of conversation in the news these days for a variety of reasons, and the term that keeps coming up is community policing. And I think that the police chief referred to this, and I think that's one of the policies that this council has always stood for, and I know the chief does, that we're very concerned that the laws are enforced, but we also want the police officers to be connected to the community and to understand the values of the community and to be people that people trust, that people want to come to, that are really part of our community human mix. We don't want people who are considered as sort of foreigners or alien or what have you. We want officers who are a part of the community and who really want to help the community, be a part of the community, and appreciate the community, and that's really what we're looking for. And I know we've had that experience in the past, and now that we have a whole new crew, I'm sure you've heard that from the chief. I'd be very surprised if you haven't. But I just want to reiterate that that's kind of where the council is coming from, and that's what we're looking forward to. And we really appreciate your joining our efforts to make this a safe and livable community.
And I'd like to welcome you all to Brisbane. Obviously, the chief has worked very hard to assemble this group of very talented and diverse officers. And I think that that's a very important thing, to have the diversity and to, as Councilmember Miller says, to get to know the community and to feel at home in the community and become a seamless part of the fabric. And so welcome to you all. And I look forward to a long career, all of you having a long career with Brisbane. Thank you.
Thank you.
There goes our safety. Off they leave.
Off to work.
No rebuttal.
So that moves us to the consent calendar. And I see that some proposed changes in language have been...
Are we going to do oral communications?
Oh, I keep forgetting that. Maybe that's a Freudian slip. So, brings us to oral communications number 1, and I have one slip from Shonda Scruggs.
Madam Mayor and fellow City Council members, my name is Shonda Scruggs. I'm the Director of Tobacco Prevention for San Mateo County Health System. I'm here this evening purely out of an educational purposes. In the fall, the City of Foster City and the unincorporated areas of the county passed policies to prohibit smoking in multi-unit residences in their jurisdictions, as well as regulating electronic cigarette devices. My office, the Tobacco Prevention Program, and our Tobacco Education Program is open to assisting any jurisdiction if they would like to advance similar policies in their jurisdiction. So I'd like to extend that offer to you this evening. If you have any questions, I provided my card to the city clerk, and I'd be happy to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to let you know, our Health and Safety Subcommittee has actually looked at that issue and is continuing to consider it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak in oral communications number 1? Seeing no hands, we will then move on to the consent calendar. And as I stated earlier, I wanted to remove item G. And
so it looks like we have 2 minutes. That also, Councilmember Lee wants to remove November 6th, right? And I like to remove November 20th in both cases, just for some small additions.
okay, and so that leaves A, C, E, F, and H on the consent calendar.
Right.
Do I have a
second
motion?
I think you moved it, right? You did, right?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. I'll move adoption of the.
Yeah, no.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then item A, which is the minutes of November 3rd.
No, B.
I'm sorry, B, November 6th.
Okay. So I had some changes to those on page 3 regarding South San Francisco Scavengers franchise agreement. I wanted to add that there was a comment by Charlene Manson from Altamar at the Ridge. She had also noted that unlike other residents in Brisbane, that the Altamar residents do not have the 2 free pickups per year for bulky items. And then on that same theme on page 4, in response to that comment, Councilmember Lentz had asked if the scavenger company would consider allowing 2 free building pickups per year at Altamar, and Mr. Formosa from the scavenger company said that they could consider it and would need to look at the details.
So with those,
Those were the only changes.
so with that, would you move approval with those changes?
Yes.
And is there a second? Any?
Second.
Second.
Okay. So move approval of the minutes of November 6th, 2014. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then Councilmember Miller, you had some,
Yeah, actually, I guess Laurie, the one in yellow, is that yours?
Yes.
It's 6 too?
So this is the
November 20th?
November 20th minutes.
So you have one line there.
So,
I have
right,
paragraph.
on page 6,
Right.
it says that I had suggested 2 language changes to programs HI.1.B and C, and I wanted to just add in what that was regarding, to eliminate the language regarding secondary dwelling units at Landmark at the Ridge, for clarification.
Right. And then you'll see a paragraph there which stipulates essentially the reasons why I voted against forwarding the housing element. So I felt that the minute should reflect, okay, so why are we voting that way? And so this sort of summarizes my position.
okay.
I don't dispute that you've written this, but I guess one thing I would note is that when I was reading the minutes, I noted, as it is common with all of our minutes, that it doesn't usually go into detail as to the council member discussion or what our opinions are. And I don't know what the protocol is, but that's what I've noticed, in that I think all of us probably said, why we voted the way we voted, but it's not in here. So I think if we're going to put in your comments, I'd like to have a chance to also, go back and review what all of our comments were. And perhaps maybe the staff or city attorney can advise on how detailed these minutes should be.
Yeah, well, the previous, and Clark will remember this because he was a part of that decision, the previous minutes some years ago were very thorough, almost too thorough, and that, sort of almost verbatim. And then it was decided that was, too much, and it was expensive, and that's when we had budget problems and so forth. And then the movement was toward what we'll call action minutes, and you'll still see that phrase at the top. And that was basically just, motions for and against, and so there wasn't any real information in the minutes about what any of the substance of the discussion was. And so then there was a belief expressed by numbers that we shouldn't go all the way back to the verbatim, but we should at least have the substance of the issues that were discussed, so that people wouldn't have to go all the way through several hours of tape in order to find out what is the essence of the issues that are being presented here. And there have been a number of occasions in which we've attempted to do that with minutes. I know I've added a number of things, the point being that something is an important substantive issue, at least ought to be there. Now, where you draw that line becomes, of course, murky, but it's really up to us. I mean, it's our minutes, and so we decide. I don't think the attorney has any role in this. Really, it's really up to us to decide how extensive we want the minutes to be. And my argument would be that, we need to at least have an inclusion of the key substantive discussion that council members engaged in. And I'm quite open if other council members want to, present, what their arguments were so that it's a fuller conversation. That's fine with me too. I have no objection to that. But I just think that the minutes are the permanent record, and that's likely what people will refer to in the future. And if someone wants to know, okay, so what was the essence of this discussion? In my view, that that should be there. And so I'm just suggesting this from the point of view of what I said in terms of my position, so it's clear. If others want to add to that, I mean, I have no problem with that either.
Well, it sounds like that's the case, so let's just pull it off till the next meeting and then allow other people to comment on it. And I think with regards to what you're saying, Ray, is we'd probably have to have staff come back, because if we're going to add to the minutes and make them more substantive than what they are, it becomes a budgetary issue, and we'd have to do a supplemental appropriation to cover that. And if that's the direction.
Well, not necessarily. The reason it was a budgetary item before is because the transcripts were actually sent out for someone else other than the city clerk to transcribe. And that was the budgetary issue.
Yeah, I guess
so the question becomes, what's feasible for the city clerk to do?
Yeah, and I guess probably would want to hear some feedback from staff on that as far as, what workload. Right?
Yeah, I got some comments about that too. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if a council member wants to add additional minutes or additional information to their minutes, that's fine. But I think what we have in place works. Granted, we still use paper, and none of us. Well, I guess Lori, you use your iPad. So at council meetings, you're the only one. We're still in the old technology. I'm trying to get into the new technology, but I'm having a hard time with it. But I think if someone wanted to find out what we said, they're going to use technology, and they're not going to really use this. This is just kind of the bare bones, and I would leave it at that. But if a council member chooses to add additional information, I think that should be their choice, but not to make it a going back in time and having very extensive minutes in writing. I don't think it's necessary. So I don't know. Is that what you were saying? Or
it sounds like. I think we're doing more than. Actually, what's happening now is more than action. Even though it says at the top action minutes, we really aren't doing action minutes anymore. Action minutes you could get on a page. Basically, yes and no for votes, and there's no substantive information whatsoever. That's really what action minutes are, and that basically is really nothing in terms of giving you any information as to what the discussion was. And so I think we're now moving into a more reasonable set of minutes in which we have enough information to give us a sense of, so what was the discussion? And I think that's really what minutes should be, in my opinion. And I would say that the technology that will be used is when people go to the website and they go and look up the minutes, it's still something that's a written form. And so even though you're using technology, you still have something written. And so that's what I'm arguing for, that we should have the essence of the different points that are made by all the council members, and whatever people feel needs to be there to have their view on an important issue accurately represented. I think that's what we should do. That would be my view. And so that's why what Clark was suggesting is that, and I have no problem with that. If other members feel that they want to have their point of view stipulated in response, so okay. And if we want to ask the city clerk to say, okay, so how can we manage all this, and where do we make judgments as to how far we go on this? That should be discussed, and so I would be happy to just pull it and bring it up at a subsequent meeting.
So
I think we've all noted that it's the minutes, like, they're not action minutes. They're detailed as to what the public has said, but then as to what the council discusses, it just says after council member discussion, we voted this or that way. And I agree. I think it would be helpful for the public and for us in, reviewing prior meetings to be able to go back and look at the minutes and see what everyone's reasoning was, on a major higher level, not detailed necessarily, but just to see what, without having to go back and review the video, to be able to see it in the minutes, I think would be helpful. So if staff has the ability to, kind of pull out the major reasons or, the major points that we're making in our discussions, I think that would be helpful. So I would recommend pulling this and giving everyone on the council a chance to go back and review their notes or the video to see what was said. And, I haven't read this yet, but it does look pretty detailed. So I think if there's a way, if this is as succinct as it can be, that's fine. But I think we should try to make the council member discussion notes as brief and to the point as possible.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think because of the complexity of this particular issue, this is about as brief as it can get.
Okay.
You'll see.
So I'd like to make a comment. I think that while these aren't true action minutes that we've been doing, it is something that the staff has been putting together to be able to put the essence of what we've discussed. And just like on the prior minutes, Councilmember Liu had some clarifications that she wanted to put in about things she said or that the public had said to be more open and more transparent as to what the discussion was about. I think that any of us has the opportunity when we review these to add something that we feel is important to those minutes. I don't think it's up to staff to weed out that for us, although I would say that if we had the minutes in a more timely manner, instead of 6 meetings in 1 minute, one go, it would be much easier for us to review without having to go back and look at a tape or decide if they're to our satisfaction. I think each council member should have that opportunity to add in something they feel that they said that is important to be in the minutes. And so if Councilmember Liu would like to pull these minutes in order to have a sense of rebuttal or to put more information in because another council member has put more information in, I'm fine with that. But I think that what staff has been doing has been adequate, but that it's up to us to add something that we feel is substantial. And if staff can work in that context where we give changes, proposed inserts, I think that that should be able to work for both staff and for council. Does that make sense?
Okay.
All right.
So at that point, would you like to pull these so that you have an opportunity to
Yes, please.
add more information? Okay. And is that the council's wishes
That's
that
fine.
we'll
Yeah.
postpone those minutes approval? And does staff have a problem, any staffing issues with getting changes to us? How quickly would you want those changes?
The way
for you
things are
after
working
the-
now works fine without any additional budgetary concerns or people or contracting them out. If we were to go to more detailed minutes, then I would want to come back and let you know what those impacts would be. But for the way it's working now is fine. I give you the minutes if Lori has, or one of you have any changes you'd like to propose. If you email them to me, I put them in front of you, and I'm happy to add them. That's not a problem. So.
Okay.
The only issue I see, though, is if we continue with this method, is that if, one council member has comments and then we don't see it up until the meeting, and then other council members may want to add their comments, it does create a little bit of a delay. So there's some advantage to having a little higher level of detail up front. And it sounds like, Terry, that you're suggesting that we continue with the current procedures and just allow council members to add more detail when they think it's deemed necessary. Is that right?
I believe that is what we thought about, but again, that's something that we should bring back at a meeting when we can discuss it fully. And
Okay.
so this, I think, is just the discussion of these minutes.
Okay.
And whether these minutes are adequate. I think to make a decision on how we're going to move forward, we would want to put that on agenda and make a decision at that point. We've always allowed council members to insert something if they felt it added clarification. And obviously, Councilmember Miller feels that this was an item that, on his comments, needed more clarification. So I'm not saying we're setting a policy, but I think that it's always been that way where we could make changes or clarifications.
Okay.
And then on item G, for the Open Space and Ecology's annual report, I wanted to pull that only because I wanted to thank the Open Space and Ecology Committee for the work they've done and acknowledge that it is a benefit to Brisbane and that it's very important work, and we rely on their input, and we appreciate their accomplishments. There's no one at the meeting from the Open Space and Ecology Committee, but I would like to acknowledge their work. Any comments from?
I agree.
Yeah, I second that. In reading the report of accomplishments, I started to kind of highlight the ones that were important, and then I ended up highlighting almost everything. So they've clearly done some good work, and I'm very happy that that they're continuing that in that regard, and thank them for their accomplishments.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, no, I wanted to second the commendation. But I also wanted to point out that when Councilmember Liu and I went to the Open Space and Ecology as a liaison committee, we discovered that just within a year or so, some important history had somehow or other been forgotten. And one of the things you'll see is missing from this particular list of accomplishments, which in and of itself is significant, is the vegetation management program, that is the handling of the invasive species on the Brisbane Acres, and which we've always budgeted for. And somehow or other that fell between the cracks, and the switch in personnel and the committee membership, and when I brought it up, nobody knew what I was even talking about, including Michelle, by the way. So it was very surprising. So now the city manager has spoken with the new chief staff person, Karen Kinzer, and they're now back on track, and so we want to make sure that our responsibility for the maintenance of the Brisbane Acres continues ongoing, and that's an annual program. And that's the one thing that's missing here that would have been present in all the previous annual reports, which is missing here, and that's the reason why, and it will now return now that we've got things straightened out. And I think that Karen Kinzer has been referring to Fred Smith in order to sort of bring her up to speed on what's been done in the past and what still needs to be done and so forth. Maybe the city manager can confirm my understanding, but have I got that right?
You got everything correct, and if you want to just maybe take a moment, Karen can kind of update you on the vegetation management plan for this year, because she's actually pretty far along with that, so I'll let her handle that.
Yeah, council members, thank you for bringing that up. We did get Fred Smith to attend our last meeting that was just Tuesday night and presented the plan, the vegetation management plan, which is for 2015, and we're ready to execute a purchase order, and some of the work's going to happen now in the winter, spring, and some is going to happen in the summer. So we've identified what the work is for this year, and the Open Space and Ecology Committee approved the plan, and so we're off and running. And we are using Fred Smith to take us through some of the spots in the acres that we're not familiar with and transition it over so that there is continuity of that maintenance and taking care of those areas, and that we're not kind of going in without the historical knowledge. So we should have shelter belt builders out in a couple of weeks starting the work.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, thank you for pulling that, Tara.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Just told my wife to come pick my granddaughter up. Yeah. Oh, she wants to stay now? She said no. Okay.
Okay. So this item we have postponed, and that brings us to old business. Item A, consider adoption of Ordinance 593, waiving the second reading, repealing Section 2.20.020, members not to hold other offices of the Brisbane Municipal Code. And staff report, please. Oh, well, so Councilmember Lentz is excusing himself for the discussion on this item. I had questions from public why we hadn't
Right.
in prior meetings. So, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, council members. At the last meeting, the council introduced on a first reading an ordinance that would repeal Section 2.20.020 of the Brisbane Municipal Code. That provision provides that Parks and Recreation Commission members may not hold another public office or full-time position with the city, and also requires that the Parks and Recreation members be residents of the city. Repealing the section would eliminate the requirement or the prohibition against holding another office for Parks and Recreation Commission members, and would eliminate what is essentially a duplicative requirement for residency for Parks and Recreation Commission members. That duplicates a more general provision that applies to all commission members. At the last meeting, council asked to made several minor amendments to the ordinance, and those amendments are reflected in the amended ordinance that you have before you. The copy is redlined so you can see the changes. There are some wording regarding recognizing that all of the policy decisions that the Recreation and Parks Commission make come before the City Council. And there is an additional whereas provision toward the end of the ordinance that makes clear that the City Attorney has provided general guidelines for the Parks and Recreation Commission member who may simultaneously hold another public office. And those guidelines are for allowing that individual to determine whether or not his or her duty of loyalty to the city might be compromised. And also the provision is recognizing that the City Attorney is available to consult for further guidance as necessary on this issue, both for the council and for any commission member. Additionally, the council had requested further clarification in the staff report, and specifically with respect to the guidelines that are set forth in the staff report for a Parks and Recreation Commission member who simultaneously holds a school board position as a member of the school board. And the staff report does that on page 4 under the guidelines section. There's just a little more clarity with some of those guidelines, making clear that what our recommendation is. First of all, we recommend that a commissioner who also sits as a school board member not serve on the Teen Services Subcommittee of the Commission because the Teen Services Program is run by the school district with city funding, and that would trigger a potential conflict of interest in most cases. So we are recommending that a commissioner in that situation not serve on that subcommittee. With respect to the other guidelines that we've made, we've flagged the issues, the circumstances where a potential might exist, and recommend that the commissioner come consult with the city attorney with the particular facts in front of the city attorney, so we can determine whether or not a problem exists in that situation. These guidelines are intended to sort of cast the net of where the problems might exist. It won't exist in every situation, but at that point you have to kind of look at the facts to determine whether there is a problem. And so the commissioner is free to consult with the city attorney whenever any situation were to arise in this case, so that the commissioner can be apprised of whether the city attorney believes there would be a potential breach of duty of loyalty to the city. And so with that clarity and with the amendment to the ordinance, the council has before it the opportunity to either go ahead and approve this ordinance or to determine that it doesn't want to repeal that provision and leave the law as it is currently.
Thank you.
I will, if you pardon me, I will add that the repeal of the provision puts the requirement back to what state law requires. In other words, with the current ordinance, we are going further than state law in determining what a commissioner can and can't do in terms of holding an office. By removing the ordinance, then the standard would be determined under state law, and under state law, all commissioners owe a duty of undivided loyalty to the city, and the guidelines here are guidelines that would determine whether there is a potential conflict that would create a situation where that duty of loyalty perhaps may be compromised.
Thank you.
I have one
question for staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
One tiny quibble, Teresa. Did you write this, or
yes, I did.
You did. Okay, because usually when we receive something, it's usually signed by the attorney. The copy we get. And,
the memo. It was the memo or the ordinance. Are you discussing?
On the approved as to form?
Yes, that I apologize that went out without a signature. I wrote it. I have approved it, and I can certainly approve it for the clerk now on the copy. But this was written by me and submitted by staff. I think it just kind of went out without the signature.
I just wanted to verify that because
absolutely, it's approved as to form. I approve it as to form.
Okay.
Besides, it's a great signature. I said it's a great signature.
The invisible one.
Any other questions for staff?
Well, I have 2 points I wanted to make, if I may.
Okay.
Okay. Well, 3 points, actually. First, I wanted to thank the city attorney for responding very accurately to all of our suggestions. It seems to me that you've captured them all very, very correctly. So I'm pleased by that. And so that means I'm, happy and comfortable with the language of the ordinance, and will, in fact, vote for it. That was my second point. The third thing is that I noticed, we finally got the right agreement between the city and the school district.
Yes.
and reading that was quite instructive. That's the so-called amended and restated cooperative agreement for the shared use of public facilities and programs between the City of Brisbane and the Brisbane Elementary School District. And one of the things I noticed in reading that was the same thing that Clark and I noticed when we read the Scavengers franchise agreement, that things change over time. And even though this is only 5 years old, it's already out of date. Now, fortunately, there's a provision in here that says that it's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. And, this is the 5th year. So one of the points I wanted to make, and maybe we can do that subsequent to voting on the ordinance, Madam Mayor, is to get an agreement to put this on the agenda, because obviously our school committee needs to look at it and bring it up to date, and then bring it back to us for the new version that incorporates the way things are now rather than how they were 5 years ago, which is clearly different.
Very good point.
Yeah, and actually, to your point, Ray, the subcommittee met with the school staff on the teen program or the after-school program, and that's probably something that should be rolled into it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's not there at all. There's even reference to, the redevelopment agency, and, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that need to be updated.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my comments on this matter. Ready to vote when my colleagues are.
Okay. Laurie, do you have any comments to make?
Sure. So I also wanted to thank the city attorney for incorporating our comments. I think that the revised memo provides a lot more clarity, especially with respect to the guidelines. So I was very pleased to see that. One question I had is, you had mentioned that the ordinance includes an additional whereas clause saying that the city attorney has provided the guidelines to a commission member who simultaneously holds another public office. So is that saying that in this case it has been provided, or that in future cases it shall be provided? Because right now there is no simultaneous position being held since there was a resignation. So I'm wondering if that should read shall provide.
The intent of this is that the city attorney has provided and has done so through the staff report, guidelines in a situation where you might have, I'm not saying that we do have, but in a situation where you have a Parks and Recreation Commission member who simultaneously holds a school district, who simultaneously holds another position. And the specific guidelines provided are ones where there was a school board position is the other position. If it happened to be that the Parks and Recreation Commission member holds another type of office, we would then be able to provide clarity about that. But we have provided some clarity, and the clarity that we have provided through the staff report is in the situation where that other office is a school board position. So to answer your question, if I may, the advice has already been given, and the advice has been given about a hypothetical situation, which you're correct, does not exist.
Okay. So in the future, would guidelines be provided to a person who holds simultaneous offices?
My recommendation would be, if that situation were to arise, that the city attorney be consulted and we look at the relationship. What position are you holding? If it's a relationship that, if the commissioner is holding a position with an entity that has a relationship with the city that is as intertwined as the relationship with the school board, I would do the same sort of thing and provide guidance. But it's impossible to do that without knowing what the entity is.
Okay.
It becomes a very hypothetical and probably largely useless exercise at that point.
Okay.
You need a little bit more facts. If the entity really doesn't interact in any way with the Recreation and Parks Commission, and there's really no overlap, then there would probably not be as many guidelines, and it would be much more of if something arises where the two interests do overlap ever, please come talk to me. And it would be as simple as that. So I think any commission member who finds themselves wearing these two hats should come talk to the city attorney to get more guidance. And in the case that was before us, where we were talking about sitting as a school board member, those guidelines, the general guidelines, have been issued, and the individual could use those guidelines and then come talk to the city attorney in a case-by-case situation if something comes up.
Okay, thank you.
Not to beat a dead horse, but in that same extra paragraph, the city attorney has provided general guidelines for a park and recreation commissioner. But do we want to specify that general guidelines for a park recreation commissioner or other commissioner member as appropriate? Should we put, because you can't specify what the office is that this is affecting, is there a way to put as appropriate to the office held?
The advice that was given was really about the Recreation and Parks Commission and the school board position. The instance where those were the two seats that the same individual held. If for example, we were talking about a member of another commission, another advisory commission, who was sitting on the school board, it could be that this kind of overlap between the jurisdictions doesn't exist to the same extent, and so those guidelines would change. So the guidelines that I provided really were ones that were very much tailored toward a person sitting both on the school board and as a Parks and Recreation Commission member. We can change this to say that the city attorney has provided general guidelines for Parks and Recreation Commission member who simultaneously holds, if you want to say, a seat on the school board, and the city attorney is, to jump ahead, the city attorney is available to consult for further guidance or to commissioners who simultaneously hold other seats. I mean, we can add a catch-all there that would catch everyone else. And I think that would get at your concern, Madam Mayor, about making sure that we've captured the universe. But I think that the take-home message to a commissioner who is holding two seats should really be, come talk to the city attorney and let's see where the pitfalls might be for you.
Well, I understand that we've written this ordinance for a particular instance and a particular possible conflict under our prior governance. But I just wonder if we are putting ourselves in the situation of having to do this every time there is someone that has a conflicting appointment, or if we, while this can go forward, it's something that when we go to appoint a commissioner, that we should be looking at those items before we appoint instead of initiating an ordinance after the fact.
Yeah. May I make a suggestion? I understand what both you and Laurie are saying. And it seems to me that Teresa was pretty close in how to fix that so it's more generic. Because the first part of the whereas can be that the guidelines that specify the overlap between the Recreation Commission and the school board have been provided. I mean, that's the specific case that's been provided. And then the second, the city attorney is available to consult for guidance on, for further guidance on this overlap or for complete guidance on other overlapping loyalties, something to that effect. So that way the first part of the whereas can refer specifically to what's been done, and then the second part of it can refer to other possible overlaps. Make sense?
And I would just add to that, I think that makes sense, but I would just suggest changing holds to held, because that's what confused me, that the Parks and Rec Commissioner no longer holds that other, she's no longer on the Parks and Rec Commission. So she simultaneously held another public office.
But
or I mean,
She actually never did. She resigned her position with the city, her commission seat with the city before she was sworn in.
okay, so then that's
So this was the guidelines are really, if there ever is a Parks and Recreation Commission member who does hold that seat along with the school board position simultaneously, you actually have never had the situation. And the former commissioner resigned from her commission position because the current law would require her to do so before she got sworn in. So it never happened. So this is a hypothetical. These are the guidelines should
it ever happen.
Yeah, and
okay.
it
Well, then
won't
should
happen unless you appoint someone who is in that situation.
Okay. Well, if it's a hypothetical, then should it be shall provide rather than has provided? Because it's confusing when it says it has been done. I wasn't sure whether this was already something that was done in this particular case or whether this is, like you said, a hypothetical.
Well, the guidelines
Future.
the guidelines have been provided and they're in your staff report.
Right.
The hypothetical is the situation that, and I can certainly clarify that. I can clarify that, and to take away that ambiguity, but the advice has been given and you have it
Right.
in your packet.
Right, because the advice for one particular overlap, that is being both on the Recreation Commission and the school board, those guidelines are there, and so that's been provided. That's, as I understand the logic of this.
Provided to the ordinance, not to a person.
No, they're provided to us, to the city, for access to anybody who wants to refer to them. So they exist, and the council is aware of them, and hopefully the staff and others who might want to confer. But then there's a possibility of other kinds of overlaps, conceivably. And so that's where you want to get into the generic issue that, okay, we got guidelines for one specific kind of overlap, which is probably the most difficult and most important one, but there might be some others, could conceivably be. And so therefore, that's when you say, okay, for that purpose, then the involved parties should consult the city attorney.
Okay. Now, I think you've clarified it. I misunderstood that. I thought you were saying that their guidelines were provided to a person, but you're saying to the city for our advice.
Well,
They've been provided to the city, and
Right.
I mean, this is not a confidential memo. This is a staff report. It's a public document that I suspect the former commissioner has taken a look at. I suspect that many people have taken a look at.
Right.
But
I'm sure every member of the Parks and Rec Commission has.
So
So one clarification maybe then to say, the city attorney has provided general guidelines in a situation where or in which, just so it's clear that these are guidelines that were provided for this particular hypothetical situation,
Right.
not that they were provided to a
Right,
person.
right. So I'm sure the city attorney can clarify that whereas, so it satisfies what's actually been done and also leaves the opening for the generic possibility of other kinds of overlaps.
so the other kinds of overlap would be the Parks and Recreation Commission member holding another type of seat.
Right.
This whole ordinance that you're repealing only applies
Right.
to Park and Recreation Commission members. It doesn't apply to other commission members. So that's. We will draft it so that that's the application.
But the Park and Recreation is the only thing that was specifically excluded in our current ordinance, and so that's all we're really addressing in this ordinance.
Absolutely.
Whereas every other commissioner has the same duty of loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it has never been something that had a viable conflict that was spelled out in our
Right. Right.
So, any other questions?
No, I don't have a question. Actually, I think we can probably move forward. It's just a little adjustment. I don't think it's.
I think it's a
enough to
clarification, really, yeah.
Keep it from off the board. So
Yes,
I
I
agree.
think we can move forward with it.
Yeah, it's just a clarification.
yeah, and I make a motion as such. To approve.
Okay.
The second reading with the clarification that we've agreed to on that particular whereas.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, can we ask Commissioner Lentz to return to the chambers?
Yeah, though, I don't know, the other item that I wanted to talk about, I don't know whether that's a problem for him. I don't think so. And maybe he should be here because he's a member of the school committee, right?
He's
Talking
The
about
2x2
updating the agreement.
the 2x2 subcommittee.
Right, right.
Oh, I think he should be here for
Yeah,
that.
okay, good. That's what I thought.
Although perhaps we should do that.
No, this is just to talk about agendizing it.
Okay. I just didn't know if we should do that in council matters instead of.
No, but it's a part of this agenda item.
Okay.
It's part of the materials.
But that, we might want to discuss it during the matters where we're discussing the subcommittees, because the composition of that subcommittee may change.
Well, I don't think that makes any difference.
Okay.
Because what we're talking about, it seems to me, so I should bring you up to date, Cliff. One of the things that I noticed in all this material that, of course, you didn't read, has to do with the cooperative agreement between the city and the school district.
Well, first of all, Cliff, it passed 4-0.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the
Well, he knew that.
slight modification.
But one of the things that came up out of the packet of materials was that this cooperative agreement that exists now calls for a 5-year revision or 5-year update, and it's been 5 years. And if you read the agreement, you can see that there's a lot of elements that are really out of date, and so it really needs to be brought up to date. And actually, it calls for an update in 5 years, and it is now 5 years. And I was suggesting, and I think Clark was agreeing, that it probably should go to the school committee, right?
That's been the history.
That's been the history, yeah. So then, what I was going to ask for is that that issue of updating that agreement be referred to the school committee, subcommittee, and then be brought back at a future agenda.
I think that's a good idea.
In fact, why don't I move that, just to make it clear?
Second.
Can we do that?
Sure.
I don't think you need to have a motion to put it on the agenda for at some point.
Okay.
Can we make a recommendation to staff?
There you go.
I can't hear you.
You're not on.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just, it was on the other way.
It was pointing towards Clay.
You don't need to move in order to put something on the agenda. You can just ask staff to put it on the agenda. And so the motion is unnecessary.
Yeah, okay, whatever. I just thought, why not? But
We'll
if you
put it
don't want
on
to
the
move, that's okay. I don't care.
We'll put it on the record that we've asked staff and the school subcommittee to look at the agreement between the Brisbane Elementary School
2x2
District and the
committee,
city.
And bring it up to date.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And that moves us to new business. Item B, which is the adoption of Resolution 2015-02, adopting the first revised and restated joint exercise of powers agreement, JPA, for the San Mateo Operational Area Emergency Services Organization. And
Mayor, I apologize. Actually, that is also a Randy Rowe staff report, so if we could attempt to wait.
Well,
Or if Clark wants, Clark's been on the committee, so.
Because I am the representative for the council, and Randy certainly has had his fingers on it, and we're both in agreement to move it forward. Actually, we had a meeting tonight for the Emergency Service Council, but I didn't make the meeting. I called them and told them I wouldn't be there, but that the intent was to, both Randy and I support this, though it's not perfect. It's better than what it was, and we'll move it forward now. The cost of this to the city is, I think, our annual, is about now up to about $7,700, a little less than $7,700 per year. And, You know, while it's good, it's a work in progress. The whole Emergency Service Council, you know, you're not really going to know how that functions until something really big happens, and you know, it could be Keystone Cop-ish, but maybe not. You know, I think that Brisbane, being as isolated as we are from most of the county, that, you know, we'd really have to rely on what we do here with our certs and everything like that. But this is good to at least have the connection with the rest of the county. So my recommendation is to move it forward and approve it. Most of the cities currently have approved it. This was actually approved by us last year, but the county attorney had problems with certain things in it, and we had problems with certain things in it, and brought to your attention, and everybody moved it forward. So to keep it from, you know, not holding up the show, we went ahead and approved it, but then the county council had problems with it, so then it went back to staff, and then all these revisions were made. So, but now we're ready to move forward. So my recommendation is to go ahead and move it forward. This is, and kind of to your point, Ray, if you had read the old JPA, it was way out of date.
Right.
So this kind of brings it up more. So.
Right. Yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember you were discussing the frustration you had with the moving ahead before it was really finalized, and so I think what you're saying is you're comfortable with by and large comfortable with the finalization with the input of the
I am,
county
and
attorney.
actually I call that a motion. So
yeah.
I'll second.
But
Okay.
So reading this, it looks like that, you know, to get the 20 cities involved or thereabouts all on the same page, it would go stale very quickly, as if everyone wanted to make their 2 cents worth of changes.
Well, actually, all the cities, you know, all the city managers, Clay went to all the city managers who then conferred with the chiefs, both police and fire, and everybody. And I think, Lisa, you've reviewed this, and certainly Ron has.
And the city attorneys, too.
Yeah, city attorney also. So no, it has.
A lot of work, a lot of work.
Yeah, and Randy's been a real fireball on this. So, you know, both he and I kind of, you know, you're finding out Brisbane actually reads stuff. So it's interesting.
Laurie, did you, any comments?
No,
Laurie?
I'm comfortable with the
Okay.
document.
Cliff?
Yeah, I made a second.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So that passes unanimously. And then we go to adoption, item C, adoption of resolution 2015-03, approving a loan to the successor agency in order to provide funding to cover the successor agency's 2014-15B requirements. And I will let staff explain this one. Staff report, please.
Sure. The successor agency, when it provided information to the Department of Finance concerning how much money was left over a couple of fiscal years ago, there was about $376,000, $483.76 left over. We had then taken that off of our 1415A ROPS. We deducted it from the amount that we requested in 1415A. DOF was very nice and also deducted it from the 14 and 15B ROPS. They gave us 5 days of review for that. During that 5 days, we were working with our external auditors to make sure that our information we were providing to the public was accurate. And as you know, we have received our financial report and we do provide accurate information. However, that took a lot of staff time and we did not catch the duplication that DOF imposed upon us. We have talked to DOF since that time. We do not have a recourse in the current ROPS for them to increase the amount that we get. So what they have told us to do is put a loan on the 14 and 15B ROPS, so that way we would repay ourselves money in the 15, 16A ROPS. So we're short in 14-15. We need to repay ourselves in 15-16. DOF has given us the guidance, and we have received an email from them that they will approve that loan. So we just have to go through the process of borrowing money from the city to give to the successor agency, so the successor agency does not default on its bond payment. That's coming up on January 26th.
Okay.
So that's what this one is about. And the resolution is what takes care of that. We will be meeting with the Oversight Board next week to have them approve it. We would then include it in our 15-16A. We recommend that this come from the marina. The marina has about $1.3 million of cash available. It would be repaid on the 15-16A ROPS, which means that we should be getting that money sometime in June. So it wouldn't affect any of the projects we have ongoing. And if you remember, the underlying bond issue was for the construction of the marina, which is why staff is recommending that this be loaned from the Marina Fund. And we've met with the person who represents the City Council on this issue when we discovered it. And he was in agreement with the process.
And just to note, we will be meeting with the successor agency later tonight.
Right.
So with that, any questions for staff?
I do not.
I have one. Stuart, could you just explain what happens if we don't approve this and we default? What?
Well, if there's a default from any agency of the city trying to get a loan to do a borrowing in the future would be very difficult. I mean, even recognizing that it's a separate entity, what bond buyers would look at is that the same governing board defaulted on one bond, and that therefore they would not, if they felt that they needed to, they would default on others. So our ability to borrow in the future would be impacted. I couldn't tell you exactly how much, but we would not be receiving the number of good qualified bids that we've received in the past. As you know, S&P has consistently graded us. I think we're at AA-. So we have a very good bond rating. This would impact that.
So it becomes academic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lori, any comments?
No comments.
Yeah, I have just, unless I missed it, I didn't see a copy of the email from the Department of Finance in our...
I apologize that we didn't include that. We will get a copy to City Council.
It's always nice if they're going to make a commitment to do something and that they've actually put it in writing for us to also see it in writing.
And we will include it with the 15-16A ROPS when we put that out.
Great. And for the oversight panel, probably would be useful too.
Yes.
Yeah. Those minutes are actually in the, or the emails actually in the next meeting, right?
No.
I read it.
There's an email attached to this report from the Department of Finance dated November 13, 2014.
And?
If that's the email we're discussing.
That's their notification of what they were doing. Right. There was another email
where they accepted it,
where they said that this is the way to do it.
The loan payback business.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right, and that was something that Betsy had been in communication with the Department of Finance. So I will have her get that email.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? So, go ahead.
I was going to move approval of the resolution, if that's okay with you.
Want to make one comment?
You want to comment? Okay.
Yes, please. So the city is doing a short-term loan to itself to keep from defaulting on a payment obligation that's due to the from the successor agency, and we are confident that this is a short-term loan and is not a debt being taken on by the city.
Correct.
And that's the only thing I would like.
Yeah, well, that's the reason for my wanting to see the email in which the Department of Finance agrees to that.
Yes.
Right. Same.
Well, this wouldn't
concern.
take effect until
We've never been hosed by the state.
Even if we agree to loan the money to the successor agency, until the successor agency votes on accepting that money, that's not going to happen.
Well, the successor agency votes on it later this evening.
Correct.
The oversight board has to approve it, and I think that meeting is scheduled for a week from
22nd.
A week from today.
So we will have that email before the successor agency meets later tonight. Is what you said before, right?
Well, I said I can get it to the council prior to the oversight board. The problem is Betsy was out with the flu.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And she was the one who was in email contact with the DOF.
Okay. Right. Does that reduce your your?
Well, I mean, we just need assurance that, as Clark said, you never can trust the state, so to speak, unless you've got something in writing, and even then you can't necessarily trust them. But that's better than not having something in writing.
But you're still making the motion.
I will make the resolve 2015-03, which is the resolution to make this loan to the successor agency in order to make up the shortfall on the RUPS.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And so that brings us to item D, which is to consider directing staff to review the city regulations of short-term home room rentals in residential zones. And this, can we get a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. In late 2014, the citizen complaint was filed against all properties in Brisbane with an active Airbnb listing. I'm sure all you're aware of Airbnb is basically a home rental, room rental site online, quite popular. A total of 7 in Brisbane were identified at the time the complaint was filed. Inasmuch as city regulations do not permit B&B establishments in residential zones, all properties were issued a notice of correction, which in this case involved removing the Airbnb listing from the site. One of the parties cited in that effort raised a number of concerns with the city's regulations and applicability to this form of quote-unquote home sharing through Airbnb, along with the lack of clarity regarding the applicability of the city's regulations to other similar activities. You've received an excerpt from the comment letter from that particular individual. You've also received the second piece of correspondence that was at the dais today from another affected individual. So, currently the city's zoning ordinance includes B&Bs in the definition of a hotel. Hotels are prohibited in R1 and R2 zones where these particular sites were identified. And there's then a lot of guidance in the municipal code for other sort of related uses such as vacation rentals, etc. So I've kind of given you a list of where the code stands today. So really, a policy question for the council today is whether the city's current zoning regulations are adequate and appropriate, or whether the council wishes to have staff reevaluate these regulations. So, if the city council does choose to have staff, direct staff to have them review the regulations, the normal course of events would be for us to review it in the form of a potential zoning code amendment, which would be subject to planning commission review. Whether or not there'd be a change recommended or not, that would still be an outcome that would be subject to planning commission review. If the council chooses, or this council could choose another alternate route to explore this issue if you so choose. So at this point, that's the question that's before the council, if you want it done and how you want it done if you do. If you choose not to review the regulations or direct staff to review the regulations, whatever code enforcement actions that are in play or are currently active, through the municipal code, there's a recourse for individuals who have cited to appeal. There's basically an administrative due process for those people. So they will have a right to to, file their objections and have a hearing before an independent administrative hearing officer on their individual case, one way or the other. If the city were to leave the regulations in place as they are, that recourse is still available to individuals. So with that, leave it open to the council and answer any questions you might have.
Would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, John, the restriction on bed and breakfast establishments in Brisbane, do you know when that was installed?
The last time that particular ordinance was amended, well, the first time was 1998. I don't know if B&B was included in the definition of hotel before that time or not. So at least dates back to 98.
Okay. And then as far as you know, the Airbnb rentals, they weren't bed and breakfasts. They were just renting their homes on a temporary basis.
Well, that's where I think the whole issue gets a little sticky. We would tend to define the rental of a room as a B&B as part of the definition of bed and breakfast, although bed and breakfast isn't really defined in the zoning ordinance. I think by common definition that would be the case. And again, with the city's regulation, there's no way would we be parsing out whether an Airbnb listing was for a house for, some period of time or for an individual room. Again, I think the zoning code is not quite that precise, and so I don't think there'd be any basis for us to start applying regulations on length of term or amount of space.
I was just curious if any of the Airbnbs were serving breakfast in the morning. But that was a complaint that. Yeah, because I hadn't heard anything about that, but all right, thanks.
Right?
Yeah, well, my cut on it is it's sort of what we've been talking about on other issues too. I mean, in a way, this is a whole new concept, and the zoning ordinance, when this was fashioned, nobody even ever thought about such a thing, and so what we got is a new situation with an old regulation. But you can tell by reading the letters that it's a pretty complicated situation, and it requires a little bit of thought as to how to distinguish, what is one kind of thing versus another, and of course the argument is that there's a difference between those official businesses that actually take responsibility and verify the renters and so forth from those that just come show up on Craigslist kind of thing. And so it really is complicated. And after I read all this, I came to the conclusion that maybe we ought to update the ordinance in some kind of way, but I really don't have any idea as to what exactly that should be. And so I would be prepared to say, all right, how about the staff take a look at it, bring it through the planning commission and bring it back to us. That's kind of my feel about it, just to kind of bring things up to date, because, it's a whole new concept. And clearly the ordinance was not designed to even deal with it.
Right. So I agree with what Ray said. This ordinance, it sounds like it's from 1998. It was way before the Airbnb time, which was just a few years ago. And, there's clearly, interest in this, since there's 7 listings on Airbnb. And I presume that the city is not receiving any taxes from any of those transactions, right, because there's,
at this point, they're not legal.
Right.
Regulated.
So, I in preparing for this, I did some research on what San Francisco has done, since I know that they went through this process a few months ago and approved of what they think is a balanced approach to allowing short-term home or room rentals on a limited basis. I think they have like a residency requirement that the homeowner has to actually live in the home for 9 months out of the year, so that it can't be like a full-time hotel or bed and breakfast. They want someone who's actually going to be living there. So I thought that was, it's interesting to see what they've done, and I think that there could be some benefits to the community, of course, increased tax revenue and bringing some people to town who might want to go to our local businesses and restaurants, help, people discover Brisbane and decide whether they want to make it their full-time home. So I would be in favor of, further studying this issue. And I recognize that there's a lot of complexities, and we need to make sure that whatever we get fits our small town. And, we're not San Francisco, so we can look at their model, but we should have it go through the process that would be relevant here.
I agree with what you guys are saying.
I'm not even sure how it's regulated, to be honest. I mean, the way it's written right now is how's something like that even regulated unless it's on a complaint basis? Because otherwise, you go knock on somebody's door. Oh, you got somebody staying here, for a week, or no, like, how does that work?
Well, I think, again, you're getting the nature of technology being sort of a double-edged sword, because the same basis upon which a private citizen could research all these, basically identify specific sites and addresses in a manner that pre-internet, you would never really have access to that. And since, again, all code enforcement action undertaken by the city is on a complaint-driven basis, basically that's provided a tool for someone who is very motivated to identify these businesses and file a complaint against them. So sort of cuts both ways. And again, in terms of as enforcement action, I'd hesitate to project how the outcome of that would be. But I think certainly looking at the regulations, I think is maybe a prudent way to go about it at this point.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to.
I would, kind of agree with my colleagues that, to take a look at it, see what, because I really don't know one way or the other as far as, what's good for Brisbane, as far as Airbnb. I mean, it seems like, I read the one letter we had in the package and the one that we had tonight with the from an individual, and for certain families it makes sense, that they do travel and they have young kids and kind of regular. You had talked about a swap with a former colleague or somebody when you went to Finland and they came from Finland to here and stayed in your house and stuff, and it's kind of probably a good thing, a healthy thing for the community. I mean, especially if somebody's house is vacant for a long period of time. At least this letter is pretty compelling to me that that can make that part of the neighborhood safer because it's not vacant. And Chief, you might want to speak to that if you care to, but I just kind of agree with my colleagues. It's probably a direction to do.
Yeah. And the other thing it does is it allows people to stay in their homes. If they've got these rising housing costs for mortgage or rent, if they have the ability to rent out a room or their house when they're not there, then it allows them to stay in their house given the high cost of living here. So my concern then is, what about these 7 existing listings? What is staff's policy and recommendation for what's going to happen to this with this code enforcement on the current listings?
Well, at this point, if the council directs staff to evaluate this issue, any kind of code action would be held in abeyance until it reaches a conclusion.
So my comments is I have actually stayed in an Airbnb homes a couple times, and I think that it is important with this sharing economy that everyone pays their fair share towards by paying their taxes, by being in compliance with the law, by having the right insurance, with the the sharing economy, with the car ride sharing. Personally, in my work, I find a lot of issues that are not addressed and are not fair to other businesses and to people who are doing it by the law. And I think that rolls over to Airbnb and the home sharing services where you're running a business, but you're not paying what a business pays or insuring it and giving the peace of mind to people who are in the community besides you, your neighbors, the other people that are involved in the economy. So I see that there's a lot of issues with this that need to be researched. Other cities, San Francisco is trying to address it where it doesn't affect their housing stock and where they get income, and it's not going to hurt their hotel business. While that might not be the same issues for us, we're on a much smaller scale. We still need to look at those issues. Santa Cruz has taken their existing vacation rental stock and put a limit on it. So people who were already in that vacation rental stock are limited, and no new vacation rentals can go on the market in the areas they've defined. And so has Santa Cruz, I want to say Santa Clara County, and other counties have done that, where they will say that they've put limits where you have to rent for at least a week because they don't want the overnight people coming in and out and causing disruption. You want people to feel part of the community. So I think there's a lot of different issues to look at, and I think it's going to be something that really is going to take staff quite a bit of time to research and see what kind of options might work here in Brisbane, and get public input on how it is for people who may be living, and it's not just the short-term rentals, the Airbnb. You know, some of our homeowners association probably have limits on rentals or rental stocks. The condominium I own in Sacramento only allows 10 or 15% of the condos to be rented long-term, even. Because they want owner buy-in. So I think there's a lot of things that staff's going to need to look at to bring back a proposal, and I don't think it's going to happen really in the short term. So I don't know how the council feels about this, but I think that our current ordinance, the way our zoning, the way it is right now, should be enforced as best we can until we make the changes, not just say all bets are off until we figure out the best plan. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I guess that's a legal question, I think.
There is.
Under your current ordinance, this type of use is not permitted. And so until it gets changed, the city can enforce its current ordinance. The city also has the discretion to put those code enforcement provisions in abeyance while it considers the matter. So it's a policy call as to whether or not how the city wants to handle this as it considers whether to amend its ordinance.
I think personally, I mean, I agree with that, but personally, until it would be difficult if we said we are not going to enforce what we have on the books, could just increase the problem or the scope of the problem and the people that would be affected by any ultimate decision we make on it by saying we're putting this law on hold or the restrictions on hold.
I sort of see it the opposite way, with all due respect, because then if we enforce it, then the people who are currently using Airbnb are no longer going to be able to get that income. They won't be able to use their house for that use. And so it will affect potentially their ability to stay in their homes. And then in the future, people might not look to come to Brisbane for short-term rentals because it won't be on their radar anymore. But right now currently is being done, at least on an unlimited basis, and I don't see that there's been any complaints about it. So I would prefer to have it be held in abeyance, any code enforcement.
I have heard complaints about it.
Well, that's what's on the board. It is a complaint, right?
Or it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been brought to our attention if
What
we
were
weren't.
what were the complaints involved?
All I had was the complaint from the individual who I wouldn't say I had a lot of conversation with them about whether they thought it was more of a sort of a policy complaint or more of a tangible physical, issue with an adjacent property. Again, their approach was to blanket the complaint on all properties listed in Brisbane. That's what their complaint was filed on. So I don't want to speculate as to their motivations at this point.
Well, I would think that if there was a complaint as to a specific nature with a specific property, that the city could address those issues. But a complaint as to the general, whether or not the city is allowing this, I think that's something that we're going to have to, that's the process that we're going to be going through. But and that person could then bring their comments, through that process. But I would see it as burdensome to blanketly restrict the current.
Enforce our laws.
Well, it's the discretion of the city.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Lori, though I hear where you're coming from, Terry, and so perhaps, we make it a priority to get this before the Planning Commission as soon as possible, have them address it, and then get it back to us, and hopefully within, I don't know, you think maybe 2 to 3 months we should be able to have this?
Yeah, I was thinking 90 days, maybe not to get here, but to get to the Planning Commission in 90 days. That was we could try to accelerate that if that's possible.
Okay. Yeah, I would prefer that. And then that addresses your concerns, Terry. To a certain degree.
Yeah, it is problematic. So I'm sort of drifting back and forth here. If we put the enforcement of the law in abeyance, and is that raising a question, are we serious about the law? And then I think the answer to that is, well, maybe the law is really obsolete, and that's the problem, and we shouldn't be enforcing. I mean, there are a lot of obsolete laws in the books that nobody ever enforces, and if we can get at this in an expedited way, so it doesn't hang out there too long, then I guess I'm more comfortable with that.
Well, I think our direction to staff is that we do want to look at what our options are,
right,
and make sure that they bring it forward as quickly as possible. But I don't think that we really know what we even want them to bring forward.
That's right.
And certainly that's not what's on our agenda tonight. So
right.
If staff, I think we're in agreement that staff should review this and bring it forward. And I do think that the proper way to do that is through staff working with Planning Commission.
Is that enough direction?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yes. Good luck.
Okay.
So it looks like our Boscawen people who attended the Bay Area Water and Sewer meeting are here now. So that means we can move on to item A, which is the consider authorizing to enter into a professional services agreement with Erler Kalwinski Incorporated and staff in regards to the sewer master plan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Good evening, and thank you for your patience in allowing our schedules to be adjusted here. So, yes, the item that is on your calendar before you this evening is An authorization, staff's recommendation that we authorize the mayor to sign a professional services agreement with Erler and Kalinowski regarding our water and sewer master plan update. You'll recall that our last update on both of these plans were completed in 2003, and the normal cycle for these things to go through is 10 years. You'll remember Ms. Dutton representing EKI out in the audience. She was with us when she presented the water shortage contingency plan. Also joining her this evening is Mr. Zuka, one of her compatriots over there at EKI. Part of the staff report, you'll notice that it's the reason we're recommending EKI is because of the very positive experience we recently had with them doing the WSCP. That was something that had to be done on a very short time frame. It had a relatively modest budget, and we found the firm incredibly easy to work with. I think at the time I mentioned to you that staff, both myself and Jerry, your senior civil engineer, Mr. Flanagan, on the utility side of the house, have known Anona for about 10 years. She's had previous experience working over at the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. We've had a lot of time to interact with her there. So that's the recommendation we brought forth to you. The scope of work is something that staff had developed, and we then negotiated with EKI. Part of the reason for that is you're allowed to do that when you negotiate professional services contract. That's the law of the state of California, and that's what I've got referenced in that very last paragraph, I think, on the first page of my staff report. And then we negotiated both the scope and then the fee. So we made those two things fit within each other. The council will recall that during last year's budget deliberations, you appropriated $200,000 to do the work, so we were able to fit it within that work. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions. I know that there were several questions. I've answered some questions from Councilmember Liu and via the city manager from Councilmember Miller, but I think some of them may still be outstanding, so I'd be happy to go to that.
Would you like to start?
Sure. So I can just, so everyone has the same information, I'll repeat my questions, which were answered. So thank you. So I had asked, the proposal recommends potentially moving to a different modeling platform from WaterCAD and SewerCAD to a newer one, since those are no longer commonly used. So my question was, when would that change need to be made, and would it affect this scope of work?
And the answer was that the scope for EKI to do is to go through and to review the current models that are out there and available compared to what we presently have, and then to bring a recommendation to staff, which staff would bring to the subcommittee presumably, and then to the full council. So there is no change envisioned as a result of doing these master plan updates, but it's possible that we will get a recommendation to transition to those new models, and then that would have to be budgeted during another fiscal year.
So do they work with the existing platform?
Yes, they would. We would use the existing platform to do the modeling off of.
Okay. And then my second question was that in looking at the build-out scenarios for the Baylands, the agreement mentions that they would look at two plans, the developer-sponsored plan and the community plan.
Correct.
And my question was, what about the alternative energy plan that was supported by the Krebel Group?
Right, and the response was that the EIR looked at a total of 7 alternatives, and some of them had variants. And of those 7, 2 of them were developed to a finite enough level of detail that we could actually conduct a water and sewer master plan review on them. And the purpose of that was really not to presume that there is some land use or there's some city council approval. It really was to give staff in particular an opportunity, excuse me, to better understand what the most intensive uses were going to look like and what those most intensive uses would require for capital improvement program. And as I mentioned, I think that would be a very important thing for us to do right now. That is really one of the developers' biggest concerns as they move along, what their infrastructure costs are. So very similar to what we've done, where we started on the Candlestick Interchange Project Study Report, and then we later did some supplemental studies funded by CCAG to do the supplemental work to understand where Geneva was going to fit in sort of a three-dimensional world. This is along those veins. It doesn't presume that you're going to make a certification of an EIR or that you're going to approve a particular project, but it just lets us look at what's the biggest thing we could be facing and dealing with in the future and trying to understand that now rather than trying to be in the midst of understanding it while the council was developing or rather negotiating a development agreement.
Okay. And then along those lines, with respect to Sierra Point, it says that there were 3 new development projects that were going to be considered, and you had said that was the hotel, the UPC property.
Yes.
Parcel R, the restaurant.
Yes, ma'am.
and the office parcel adjacent to the hotel.
Yes, which is and just for, I'm sorry to cut you off, but just because that parcel is really, the hotel parcel is really fully owned by UPC right now, but the other office that we're talking about is the one where we envision an exchange of properties with parcel R, and we let Opus get a small piece at the southern end of it. So if you were to look at what's approved right now at the Sierra Point, it's not there, but it's conversations we've had for future potential changes out there.
Okay, so the plan would study, like you said, the proposed maximum consumption of
the maximum consumption, and as you had asked, if it was going to include the buildings at full occupancy, and the answer is yes. It would be the most demanding scenarios.
And assuming that all of the buildings would be fully occupied as they're currently not.
Yes, ma'am.
Potential occupancy.
That's correct.
Okay. And then my last question was, what about projected sea level rise? Are any of our existing facilities in any flood zones?
That's correct, and I know that in your email, and I'm not sure if it's been shared with others, I took the snapshot that NOAA's got a very good website right now where you can zoom in on an area, and they actually have a little slider bar that you can select how many feet of sea level rise you want to have, and so I selected 3 and put that over the areas, and what it primarily shows is that the areas that are going to be most affected by sea level rise are the areas that are already underwater, such as the lagoon, the east-west trending channel across the former landfill that staff refers to as the central drainage channel, and then west of the railroad tracks, kind of just behind the businesses on industrial, there are 2 areas that have been referred to, I think, by UPC as the north-south drainage channels. A number of years ago, you'll remember that Ms. Dilworth came in and reported that she saw some floatable petroleum-type products on there. And so a rather lengthy project was developed. UPC went back in there and they lined those channels. But those are really the primary areas that are going to be affected by sea level rise, and we don't have any facilities presently in there.
Okay. Are there any, from the UPC's plans, are there any projected building uses at those locations?
I can't answer that specifically, ma'am, but what I can say is that certainly with regards to utilities, if they were going to propose to put something in there, they would have to make some accommodation to make sure that sea level rise didn't overwhelm those facilities. We wouldn't want our facilities to be submarine.
Obviously. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Randy, just reading through the agreement, it looks like a lot of the language is real familiar with me. It looks like boilerplate language with a few specificities. Is that?
Yes, sir. The PSA is really copied on what Mr. Topple provided over a decade ago.
Okay. And then the real meat and potatoes is in, of course, the
scope of work.
Scope of work.
Yes, sir.
But Teresa, I guess. I guess I don't know if he could speak for Michael, but did he review this? Because he hadn't. There's no signature on the staff report, and that's kind of.
He did, sir. I'm sorry, Teresa, help you out here, because Michael and I worked closely together with these. One of the things that's interesting about the PSAs is that every consultant, not just EKI, has their own little peculiar objection to the certain language and request a specific accommodation. So Michael and I went through that with EKI, and we were able to resolve it to both parties' satisfaction.
Okay, yeah. It's just, for us, I'm kind of a pet peeve is I like to see the attorney's signature on it when it reaches us, and, so.
So is that something you would like us to do before it gets put out? Because just the only challenge we have is, we're happy to do that for you, but we'd probably would have to do that via faxes or PDFs or something, because we put the staff reports out so far in advance, and we have the city attorney available to us on Wednesdays only. So,
well,
I can assure you, I've never brought you anything that legal counsel would tell you. Oh, Randy's trying to get something past me.
Let me just back up a little bit.
Sure.
In the past, we've always had the city attorney sign things like that, and it's just always gives me the reassurance.
Sure.
Instead of asking the question. So
consider it done,
sir. Done.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Go?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. I raised, as you know, a number of questions. And so when I sent an email to the city manager, and we had a conversation about it today, and actually I felt, and as we go through these, that some language that recognizes these issues would be appropriate to add.
Sure.
And I think the two of you had a conversation, and at least in general, it seems as if you were open to that.
Oh, absolutely, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'd like to sort of go through the concerns I had, and since we are talking about a 25-year plan, and
Sure.
by the time somebody starts looking at this 20 years from now, we're all going to be gone.
Right.
So it's what's in writing that's going to still be around.
Absolutely. And sir, if I may, while you're talking, if I ask the clerk if our overhead projector works, I'll bring that up because I did, in the interim, I've asked the consultant to come up with some proposed language for at least one of your concerns about the milestones, and we could share that with everyone. We could all read it at the same time instead of trying to memorize my words.
Okay. You want to do that first?
I thought we could do them concurrently, sir. Just give that thing a little time to warm up.
Yeah, okay. So is the first one about the keeping up the
milestones? Yes, sir.
Milestones,
yes, sir.
Benchmarks as we go along?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll express my concern as the technology is rolling out here. We have a not to exceed an amount in the beginning, and then we have at the end, it's all going to be based on time and materials. And there's a lot of uncertainties which comes through as to what you're going to find in various areas of infrastructure need. And so I felt that it was prudent to have benchmarks along the way to kind of make sure that as the work is progressing, that it's keeping within the anticipated expenditures. So that we don't get, surprised at the end and say, oh, by the way, it's going to cost $500,000 rather than $200,000, and how come we didn't know that? But if we have benchmarks along the way, we can sort of keep tabs on that. So that was my first concern.
And so my eyes are not reading that very well from here. I'm sorry.
My eyes
people
don't
in the
read it
audience
at all.
are having trouble. Do we have any more Zoom on that? I can start reading it now.
Good.
So the underlined text that you see there is the proposed text, which makes good sense to me. It says EKI invoices will include
How do you get this to come up on the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You got to turn it on, Ray.
Yeah,
Hit
well,
the
I'm
button over
pushing
there.
the button, but nothing's happening. So maybe I'm pushing the wrong button.
I love these live tests.
Put the button on the right.
Oh, there it comes.
But the resolution.
Resolution is really poor, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
virtually unreadable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
I
not
can read
good
it.
for the
Read it.
folks at home, but we have.
It depends.
Need new glasses.
Well, these, is this the same
Yours
as
is better than mine.
attached to our staff report?
No, ma'am. This is not. This was
is new.
created.
This is different.
I think I was talking to Anona at about 10 of 7 today, and it's been created between then and now. So
Okay, I
Okay.
can't read it.
it's what right. It's the same document, but the
There we go. That's
words that are
better.
underlined. There we go. We've got good clarity now.
One button autofocus.
Thank you.
It looks the same.
Technology works, huh?
Right, so there we go. So this EKI invoices will include a summary by task of total budget, expenditures to date, and remaining budget amounts. At regular progress meetings, EKI will also prepare for the city's review a project summary that includes the remaining task and estimated effort and expenditures to complete the scope of work. The estimated budgets in tables 1 and 2 will not be exceeded without the city's prior authorization. In practice, that's what we do with the consultants on a regular basis anyway, but I certainly appreciate Mr. Miller's concern. I think it's a good thing to memorialize so that we all understand that, yes, that is in fact really, now they can't see it, Sherry. You've got to roll down so where you can see the underlined text. Thank you. So that's what we're trying to bring to you in hopes that that will satisfy the concern.
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And thank you to EKI. Again, this is part of the reason why we recommend EKI, because I can call them when I've got 5 minutes in between meetings, and they can manage to prepare this as they're coming before us. So that flexibility is very much appreciated.
Okay, so that was my first concern, and that I think that is satisfactory. The second was a relatively minor one, but I thought it might be just important to mention anyway, and maybe just with the parentheses it can be taken care of, and that is one of the reporting responsibilities is to the City Council. But usually these matters are brought through the Water and Sewer Subcommittee.
Yes, sir.
And so I was just thinking that just to make that clear, and so that I don't know whether EKI would be involved in that necessarily, but at least that would be a part of the process. And maybe we can, when we say council, just put in parentheses, including subcommittee or something like that. That's all you need.
Sir, if you can trust us, what I'd propose is that we find an elegant place in the scope of work to amend the work products to include that the work products will be intended for presentation to the Water Sewer Subcommittee and the City Council, and leave it some discretion, because there may be a time when you might want EKI to come. I was rather thinking that perhaps
there might be some issue that requires their participation.
Right, absolutely. And again, we could work.
And again, it might not. So it depends.
Absolutely. I think we can. Yeah. I don't see Anona shaking her head, so I'm pretty sure we can come to terms on that somewhere.
Again, I just want to be sure that it's a kind of a clarification kind of thing, so nobody gets surprised.
I think we're good with that, sir.
The third comment is more problematic, but I think, again, we need to be upfront about it, and that is when we're looking at the Baylands, we have this problem that the sewer infrastructure in the Baylands is actually under the Bayshore Sanitary District and not the City of Brisbane.
Correct.
So we have another district involved. We in the past have thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could get control over that, particularly if we want to have an integrated water and sewer system, which goes along with some of the sustainability ideas. It's going to be extremely difficult to do when you have two different districts involved. And so that's a real complication for the planning as well, to say the least. But I also know that in the past, when we've raised this issue about maybe de-annexing that part from the Bayshore Sanitary District, they've gone ballistic. And in fact, in the past, have filed a lawsuit. Right. Just our mentioning it, sends them up the wall, because they're looking to that as the future of their district. And where UPC stands on all that, I'm not sure, but I'm be willing to bet that once they have some kind of approval, they'll want to have everything planned under the same jurisdiction as well, because the fewer jurisdictions, the easier it is to do anything. I guess the only thing that might be useful, and I'm going to confer with your opinion, Randy, and the attorney and the EKI. Would it be useful to mention someplace there's a recognition that there's a further complication in the Baylands with overlapping jurisdictions or something to that effect? Wouldn't have to mention the Bayshore Sanitary District per se, because that certainly will complicate in one dimension the whole analysis.
I thought you were going to take me down a different path, sir, because I completely agree with you. It's confusing when we have different service areas in here, and the way the scope is written, the way we are proposing to deal with it, is that by identifying the two alternatives being studied in the EIR that we are going to master plan, that study in the EIR acknowledges BSD as the service provider and retains them as a service provider in its review. So that's how this master plan would be done. I thought you were going to ask me, because we were going to engage Teresa, if a city could legally study as a hypothetical a master plan where they become the service provider in that service area.
Based on my prior experience and how touchy they are, I'm reluctant to go down that path, because it's not very positive for the city, I don't think.
I agree.
But on the other hand, it certainly complicates the planning of the infrastructure when you have overlapping jurisdictions.
Sure.
Particularly if you want to do something that's integrated.
Sure.
And so that, in some way or other, is probably going to be somehow or other built into the master plan analysis. Maybe they might want to make a recommendation at some point that if you want such and so some kind of infrastructure, like an integrated one, it probably would be easier to do under the auspices of one jurisdiction or something to that effect.
That's a likely conclusion, yes, sir. So I guess the question, I'm sorry.
Wanted to make sure that we're all aware of the fact that we've got a serious complication here.
Right, yes, sir.
For the bailings.
Does my answer satisfy, sir, that you're concerned that we're aware of it by kind of tracing it back to the EIR alternatives and the way it's done? Because if it does, then I think there's somewhere in there, again, we could find an elegant place to add a note where it says we're going to study these two alternatives from the EIR, and we can just put a parentheses in there, a parenthetical note in there that says, which acknowledges Bayshore Sanitary District as the service provider of this area.
Something.
That's fine.
Something like that would be good.
I think we can do that very easily, sir.
Now,
Ray,
yeah.
Ray, if I may piggyback on that.
This is a complicated issue.
Yeah, I know. I want to kind of piggyback on that with the Bayshore Sanitary Sewer District. Since there was a lawsuit that was, is there any parameters, Randy and Teresa? This is an unfair question for you because that was a long time ago, and I don't know if you studied this, but are you aware of any parameters as to the resolution of the lawsuit that for future planning issues or anything like of that nature, of how to be inclusive or whatever, and maybe that's something we have to go back and look at too, because
so my only familiarity with it is that the lawsuit basically said that you are not going to dissolve BSD at the time, and part of that finding, I believe, was that the property owner wasn't the one promoting it at the time.
Well, we technically, I don't think, could resolve. It would have to be LAFCO.
Right. So, but the property owner would have to be the applicant,
right.
typically, and then you would have to go before LAFCO and show that there would be enhanced efficiencies by dissolving that piece of it and removing them from their service area. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to play attorney, but it seems to me that a city could study pretty much whatever it wants. For instance, City and County of San Francisco is studying moving the Bayshore Station out of the city of Brisbane. It doesn't seem to trouble them in any way, shape, or form.
But they got lots of lawyers and a big budget.
So I am not familiar with the particulars of the lawsuit, the resolution of the lawsuit, or whether there was any, limitations on the city to do what it otherwise is perfectly capable of doing in other circumstance. That said, unless there was some limitation imposed, certainly the city can study what it wants and take a look at this. So, perhaps I can take a look at the lawsuit and work with the city manager to get the appropriate documents there and take a look to make sure there's not some limitation being posed, but it doesn't sound like there would be.
Okay. Just to clarify, I believe, as I understand it, this does go back a number of years, but basically the city was making an argument that because it was within the city of Brisbane, that the property owner could choose to have service either from the city or from the district, that we had overlapping jurisdictional, I won't say responsibilities, but authorities. And the court said no. They disagreed with us and said no, it is actually within the Bayshore Sanitary District, and the only mechanism for the city to provide the service would be for the property owner to go to LAFCO and have LAFCO make a decision that it's then a part of the city. I believe there was an effort to do that, and I believe that's kind of where politically it blew up at the LAFCO board. The Bayshore Sanitary District came in and was able to make whatever argument. It was a little bit before I got here, but whatever argument that was effective in persuading the LAFCO board at that time, despite LAFCO staff's recommendation to allow for Brisbane to provide the service. Despite that, they overrode that recommendation and went forward and basically created an exclusive service area for Bayshore Sanitary District. So that's where we stand today. The property owner, we've had, not recent years, but historically, Randy and I and staff and Hal Topple, when he was here, had conversations with the property owner about, that when they went through this process, that the city would kind of expect them to make that application to LAFCO and to identify the city as a service provider. We haven't really had that kind of conversation in recent years, but I would suspect as we move along in the process that would be part of it. I think we probably can sit down with the city attorney's office and make sure that there's no restrictions from us studying it. But I think it's definitely to our advantage to have the information and to do the analysis. And I think the Public Works Director has clearly indicated that kind of would be helpful in terms of him dealing with the infrastructure issues of the Baylands. So,
yeah, given the historical volatility, I think it's probably prudent to do. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you had another point to make,
I'm still.
so we'll go back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So we can get some language in there, and we can also get some legal clarification. But and I agree that it should be studied. My concern is that we are upfront aware of this issue and the complexity that it builds in for studying how you deal with the infrastructure in the Baylands. And so the consultant, I think, has to deal with that, but I don't think it's in their realm to talk about whatever action we might want to take vis-a-vis LAFCO. That's another whole realm.
Agreed. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You agree?
Absolutely. I mean, that's our issue, and that's a political
Right.
issue, and
Right.
that's not a technical engineering.
No, it's another whole realm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I still have a little bit of a problem not from a technical point of view, but from a political point of view, with the way that in all the different, both in the water and sewer and and both in the water plan and in the sewer plan, with picking two options to study. Now, I understand the reasons for that, but that's not stipulated in the agreement. And for someone reading this without knowing all that background, they could jump to the conclusion that, here they are, see, the city's pushing these two options and they're prejudging it, and you see, they're trying to set us all up, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you can hear it and you know who would say it.
Yes, sir.
And so I'm always in favor of trying to diffuse those things if there's a way to do so. And I understand the necessity for looking at the maximum amount of need we might have. But maybe we can craft some language that says, the reason we're looking at these options is because it is the major infrastructure that would be required among all the scenarios. Other scenarios will require less or different kind of infrastructure. Something to that effect, so it leaves it, the term that Clay and I agreed on, it leaves it more fluid. We thought that was an appropriate term under the circumstances. So if there's some kind of language that, that will not make it seem as if we're picking these because these are the two that are going to happen.
I think we can put some language in there, sir, that says that.
I know what the intent is, and
purposes.
I fully agree with it,
Sure.
but it may not be read that way.
Right. Understood.
So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can we put this in a way that avoids that problem by just fixing the language. The study won't be that different.
Right.
But the way we put it can be phrased differently.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, I think we could craft language. I think that's a fairly simple insert. Insert.
That's what I think too.
Talk about it just being it's a hypothetical exercise, and here's the reasons why we're doing these two, and it's not presuming any land uses. We'll just put all of that in there.
Exactly. Okay, I'd appreciate that, and I think just for the consultant, I think it would be useful if they had access to the sustainability framework.
Sure, absolutely.
And the reason that I think that's useful is that we are talking there about zero waste and minimum water use and various strategies for doing so, and there are a variety of different infrastructure alternatives that could be utilized to approach it in that fashion. And I think that should be a part of on their radar screen, so to speak. And I'm hoping that the council will, approve that framework eventually. And so, since this plan should be taken into account everything that the city is working on, I mean, that's one of the things that we're working on, and that should be a part of the mix, I would hope. Then on Sierra Point, I agree with what Laurie was raising, that we see all these problems on the Baylands, and there are some flood areas, but we can see on the Baylands how we're going to deal with it, because it's pretty well agreed that we're going to have a complete grading program there, and there's some areas that are just too low, that need to be raised, and that's all kind of in everybody's radar, so to speak. So the Baylands, we know that we got to do something to protect ourselves over time. We haven't really done anything comparable for Sierra Point. And we know that Sierra Point has got significant settlement problems. And I mean big-time settlement from just over a couple of decades. And that's created some utility problems that I don't need to tell you all about. And so it seems to me that Sierra Point has got special problems. It's not only the sea level rise, it's the settlement issue. Because, I mean, it's really going down. And that it's affecting access to the buildings, it's affecting utility lines. And certainly we may need to do something more, significant there to address that issue. Just the other day, we were at a meeting with a lead engineer, and she was talking about, what did she call it, the podium level? Remember that? Which is the different way of dealing with
garages,
utilities on a brownfield or a fill, garbage fill, what have you. I don't know whether that's something that ought to be considered. I have no idea, but that was the first time I ever heard about that kind of thing. So I guess what I'm thinking is that maybe Sierra Point needs a little bit more attention than just 2 or 3 more properties coming along. It may be a big problem for us, particularly over time. So I just want to kind of bring that out there and make sure that that's also on our radar screen.
Yes, sir. And I think what we're going to find is as we start to talk about construction methods and how to deal with that, it's actually going to be a little more problematic out on the Baylands. And the reason I'm surmising that is because we have the added challenge of the Baylands being a pre-Title 27 closure.
Right.
And the placement of that fill occurred at a much earlier life before it was clearly understood about really compacting.
It was totally unregulated. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the challenges there are going to be even more than what we're seeing out at Sierra Point. And I certainly acknowledge what you're doing, but I guess my point is that the answers that we're going to find as we look at the Baylands will be answers that we can probably dial back a little bit and use at Sierra Point, because the problems won't be quite as severe, notwithstanding the fact that we have seen, buildings have the ground drop away from them by 4, 5, 6 feet
right
out there. And we've certainly seen that at one of our lift stations. Really the biggest challenge we have out there, though, hasn't been so much that it's changing the flow. It's been more where as you're going out to Sierra Point, just after you cross under 101, that's right about at the point where you're getting to our major lift station that we have out there.
Right.
But that's also at the point where you're crossing the interface boundary between the native soil and the landfill.
Right.
And that's where we just have had differential settlement. We've had a line break 3-4 times out there at a pretty significant depth. So it's those sorts of things that we all need to understand as we start to develop brownfields.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the reason I raise it is that a lot of this is in our consciousness for the Baylands, because it's all being recently studied with the EIR and so forth. But it hasn't really been comprehensively studied for Sierra Point, so far as I know.
Yeah, and Sierra Point is a newer landfill too.
Exactly.
So, you don't.
Right. But it's got its own kind of problems that haven't been comprehensively studied in a recent fashion. So that's really why I raise it, because we kind of know we're facing some real significant problems in the Baylands, as you say, Clark, with and Randy too, with the unregulated landfill for sure. But we've had problems, and we'll continue to have problems on Sierra Point too, and we need to, and they particularly affect the utility infrastructure.
Absolutely, yes, sir. That stuff underground, it's particularly, that's one of the big challenges we have when you start thinking about putting gravity flow lines out there that rely upon a certain slope in the line, and then the ground doesn't behave like you thought it was going to.
Right.
So we'll struggle with that as we look at these details.
Right. So I guess, again, the only thing I'd be asking for is just a little language that, recognizes that complexity, so we all know from the get-go that this is part of what we're facing.
Okay, sir. Sure.
Those are my points. Thank you.
Did you have further
No, I don't have
comments or questions?
No, everything was brought out. So.
I think. Go ahead. You have your comments.
So I am not familiar with the Bayshore Sanitary Sewer District lawsuit or issues, and so I would like to be brought up to speed on that at a future council meeting, or whether it be in a memo or future council meeting. I think that'd be important because we have a lot of historical knowledge here that I'm not part of, and so I think it would be good to know more, and perhaps other council members would feel that way too, to get an update on it. And then if I could briefly, Randy touched on this, that this was a negotiated contract rather than, and I'm assuming that's rather than a request for proposal where it goes out to bid. So is that the case when?
It's yes, but it's not quite the same, ma'am, because the distinction I want to make is that you can choose to put out a request for proposals to be in compliance with state law on the selection of professional services. You're not required to. And the difference is that when you do request for proposals, they are quality-based. So they're not price-based. And in fact, a lot of people, and it's been my experience when we have in the past done RFPs here, when we've done the last two big RFPs we did was for City Hall, and then in 2002 we did one for the Water and Sewer Master Plan at the time because we weren't familiar with any consultants that we just didn't have enough knowledge of the local consultants that we thought we wanted to work with. In both of those cases, we always take the prices and put them aside because the intent with professional services is to make sure you get the person who's most qualified to do the work, and then you sit down and you attempt to negotiate a price with them. You try to come to terms with them, and if you can't come to terms, then you would go to the next most qualified, not lowest cost proposer. So it's a little bit different than what happens under the California Contract Code law.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted that clarification. So at this point,
Carrie, I just had one follow-up question.
Okay.
So, so Ray had mentioned about Sierra Point, how there's the differential settlement, and I noted in the map that I was provided by Randy about sea level rise, it doesn't show Sierra Point at all being impacted by 3 feet of sea level rise. And my question then is, does that take into account the particularities of differential settlement that has already occurred and is projected to occur at Sierra Point? Because if you've got the ground moving down, and the water moving up, it seems like they need to both be considered in conjunction with each other.
You got me, ma'am. You win. You got me that time. I don't know that we've done enough study out there, honestly, to understand what the differential settlement is really going to be. And again, where we're seeing the differential settlement is at the boundaries with what was the shoreline, not so much the boundaries with what is the new shoreline. We haven't seen settlement really out there where the riprap is and where the dikes and the boundaries have been placed. Where you've seen it is around the buildings, and where you've seen it is at the interfaces. So I don't.
And I would ask that, when they look at Sierra Point, that they take into account the settlement to make sure that the area around the buildings, in conjunction with any projected sea level rise, isn't going to have any impact on the buildings or the utilities being provided.
And I think, ma'am, that would be outside the scope of this consultant's area of expertise. I think if we wanted to do something along those lines, we would have to engage a geotechnical consultant to really look at that to understand what the interior settlement might be. And that could then inform some of the work that EKI has done, but it really requires a geotechnical engineer. So we can look into that. I can talk with Cotton Shires, our local firm, and see what they think about that.
That's it, right?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So do we have a motion to?
And ma'am, if I may, I would just want to clarify the 5 changes that we're going to make, that we're going to have EKI make to their scope, and I'll sit down with the city manager and make sure that these met your intent.
Okay.
But the first change is going to be the addition of that highlighted language that you have on the overhead. Mm-hmm. The second change is going to be the insertion and recognition that that Bayshore Sanitary District is presently the service provider, and that's how they're being studied for the sewer for the Baylands area. We're going to add some language to include that the work product by the consultant will be suitable for consumption by the subcommittee and by the city council. We're going to add some language further explaining why these 2 particular alternatives are explained, and explaining that it's a hypothetical evolution and that it's more fluid that way. And then the last thing we were going to recognize is the design challenges with settlement expected to happen both at Sierra Point and at the Baylands.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, with the understanding of that additional language, I'd move approval of the contract.
Second.
To see, what are we? Professional services agreement with Erler and Kalinowski.
Okay.
Second.
And there's a second, and so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. That passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, would we like to take a short break before we move on to the rest of the agenda and the successor agency meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Good idea.